She thought she'd bought nothing but sand, wind, and a broken fence for $25. But on her very first night, a starving horse staggered out of the desert darkness, its ribs sharp, its eyes terrified, as if it had escaped something. And when she followed its tracks back into the dunes, she realized the property wasn't worthless at all. It was hiding a secret someone tried very hard to bury. She never would have bought the land if she hadn't been desperate. $25 for a patch of desert so quiet it felt hollow, abandoned even by the wind. No one sane would call it valuable. But Nora wasn't searching for value. She was searching for distance. Distance from the mountains where every trail carried a memory, every silence echoed someone she'd lost. The desert, with its bleached horizons and brittle air, offered nothing. And somehow, that nothing felt like breathing again. She didn't expect to find anything living out there. She definitely didn't expect it to find her first. On her second evening, as the sun bled into a long strip of copper across the sand, she heard a sound so fragile, she wasn't sure at first if it was real. A gasp. A low, struggling exhale carried by the warm wind. She froze. The desert was supposed to be empty, but the sound came again. Hoarse, painful, unmistakably alive. Nora set down the weathered pack she'd been carrying, brushed sand from her boots, and listened. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then she saw movement between two fallen Joshua trees. Something collapsed, something starving. She moved closer, her steps slow, boots kicking up small spirals of dust. At first, she thought it was a deer, or maybe a stray mule, but then the shape lifted its head, thin, trembling, eyes sun-faded, yet stubbornly alert. A horse, or something that used to be one. Its ribs pressed so sharply against the skin that each breath looked like it might tear through. Patches of its coat were missing. Its legs shook beneath it, as though all strength had been scraped away by miles of suffering. The animal blinked at her, terrified and pleading at the same time. Nora felt her heart wrench, a painful, familiar pull she hadn't allowed herself to feel in months. She knelt slowly, not reaching yet. The desert fell silent again, as if waiting for her decision. The horse tried to step back, but didn't have the strength. Its hooves barely scraped the sand before it slipped, collapsing onto its side with a raw, exhausted groan. Something inside Nora broke. She remembered once pulling a wounded creature from snow, hands numb, heart frantic. She remembered warmth fading. She remembered failing, and she realized instantly she couldn't afford another ghost. She dropped to her knees beside the horse, whispering words she hadn't said aloud to anyone in far too long. "I've got you," she murmured. "You're not dying out here. Not tonight." The horse's breathing hitched. It watched her with an intelligence that pierced straight through the dust-coated dusk. Nora pulled her water canteen from her belt, unscrewed it, and held it near the horse's mouth. The animal hesitated, nostrils flaring, then nudged the rim weakly. She tilted it carefully. Water trickled onto its tongue. It was the smallest victory, but out there, the smallest things meant everything. As the horse drank, Nora scanned the sand around them. Hoofprints, erratic, circling, stumbling. This animal hadn't just wandered. It had fled. From what, she couldn't say. But the tracks told a story of desperation and fear. She followed them with her eyes until they disappeared into the far horizon, a line dissolving into nothing. Whatever had happened to this creature, it had been alone for a long time. Too long. She ran a hand gently along its neck, feeling heat, hunger, and the faintest tremor of life. "You're a fighter," she whispered. "Good. So am I." Night approached quickly in the desert, swallowing the sky in streaks of indigo and ash. The temperature would drop sharply soon. The horse wouldn't survive exposed. Nora knew she needed to move it, but moving it meant touching the bruised places, hurting it unintentionally, making choices that felt too close to past mistakes. She closed her eyes for a moment, steadying her breath, remembering the mountains, the snow, the cold that stole more than she could ever forgive herself for. Then she opened her eyes again and made the choice she always made, even when it terrified her. She leaned in. She slid her shoulder under the horse's neck, bracing herself, coaxing it gently to shift its weight. "Come on," she murmured, "just a little." The animal tried, pushing against the sand, hooves digging in. For a second it seemed impossible. Then the horse managed to rise halfway, trembling violently. Nora supported its head with both hands, guiding it upright. "That's it. Easy." The horse staggered, leaning heavily against her, nearly knocking her over. She didn't flinch. She let it lean, let it use her strength. The horse wasn't the only thing that needed grounding. Step by step, she led it toward the small shack she had claimed on the property, a structure barely standing, patched with rusted metal sheets and sun-bleached planks. She'd planned to rebuild it slowly, maybe make it livable someday. Now it became a shelter for something far more fragile than herself. When they reached the doorway, the horse paused, nostrils flaring at the scent of old wood and thyme. Nora stroked its shoulder. "It's safe," she said. "I promise." She didn't know why that promise felt so heavy. Maybe because she desperately needed it to be true. Inside, the shack was dim, the sunset light slanting through broken boards and narrow gold beams. The dust stirred as she guided the horse in. She laid down an old blanket from her pack, spreading it over the driest part of the floor. The horse lowered itself gingerly, muscles twitching from the strain. Nora knelt beside it again, feeling the cold creeping in from the desert night. "We'll get through this," she whispered. "Both of us." Saying it out loud surprised her, but it felt right. Maybe the desert wasn't empty after all. Maybe it was answering her with what she needed. She inspected the horse more closely now that it was lying still. Scars, fresh wounds, but also old ones. Not natural injuries. These were from ropes, from malnutrition, from neglect. Her jaw tightened. Someone had done this. Someone had owned this horse long enough to break it, abandon it, and leave it to die. Anger rose in her, hot and unwelcome, but familiar. She had no tolerance for people who hurt the defenseless. She touched one of the deeper wounds gently. The horse didn't flinch this time. Instead, it lowered its head, leaning it against her knee like a quiet surrender. She whispered, "Who did this to you?" Of course, the horse couldn't answer, but the silence in the shack felt thick, as if the desert itself held secrets she hadn't earned yet. She bandaged the worst of the wounds using strips from her old flannel shirt, tearing the fabric with her teeth. Her hands moved with practiced calm, though inside she felt a storm. Every scrape, every bruise on the animal's body felt like a reminder of why she'd run from the world. Humans could be cruel in ways nature never could. Nature harmed without malice. People harmed with intention. As she worked, the horse's breathing deepened, no longer panicked, but heavy with exhaustion. The desert wind rattled the loose boards overhead. Shadows crept across the floor like soft moving tides. Nora leaned back against the wall, feeling the strain in her shoulders from carrying the animal, from carrying her memories. She closed her eyes just for a moment. When she opened them again, she saw something glinting faintly beneath the horse's tangled mane, something she hadn't noticed before, hidden under grime and dust. It was a metal tag, attached to a thin leather strap. Nora reached gently and turned it over, brushing away dirt. Not a stable marker, not a ranch brand, a number, stamped crudely, 6 digits. Her brows drew together. Why would anyone number a horse like that? She had seen things like it in rescue cases years ago. Animals used for things far beyond riding or work. Animals that had been part of something organized, something illicit. Her heart sank. She whispered, "What were you running from?" The horse shifted uneasily as if sensing her change in energy. Nora exhaled slowly, forcing calm back into her voice. "It's okay. You're safe now." But her mind raced. A numbered horse meant a trail. Someone would come looking for it, and people who numbered animals didn't let losses slide. She looked toward the cracked window. The sky outside had gone deep blue, stars like cold silver splinters. The desert seemed peaceful, but she felt a weight settle in her chest. Something was wrong, something bigger than both of them. She stayed awake for hours, listening to the horse breathe, counting each steady exhale like it was proof she'd done at least one thing right. Exhaustion pulled at her, but she refused to sleep. Memories from the mountains floated through her mind. The last creature she'd failed to save. The freezing night she'd been too slow, too late. She had promised herself never again. Even if this horse brought danger with it, she wouldn't abandon it. Not now. Not after everything. She rested her hand on its neck. Its skin twitched beneath her palm, warm and alive. When dawn finally began to seep through the cracks in the shack, Nora stepped outside to fetch more water. The desert morning was cold, quiet, painted in a soft, muted gold. She filled her canteen from the large barrel she'd hauled days earlier. But as she walked back toward the shack, she stopped suddenly. Footprints, not hers, fresh, too large to belong to a child, too heavy to belong to someone wandering aimlessly. They circled the shack, studied it, watched it. Nora's pulse began to thrum in her throat like a warning drumbeat. She knelt, touching the prints, still crisp, made in the night. Someone had been here while she sat inside, unaware, tending to the horse. Someone who didn't knock, someone who didn't call out, someone who didn't want her to know they were there. She stood slowly, eyes scanning the horizon. Nothing moved. The desert looked empty again, but she no longer believed in its emptiness. She tightened her grip on the water canteen. Whoever had numbered that horse, they were close. She stepped back into the shack, lowering her voice to a whisper. "We need to be ready," she said to the horse, though she wasn't sure if she meant ready to run, ready to fight, or ready to confront the shadows she'd been avoiding for too long. The horse lifted its head weakly, meeting her gaze. Something in that look, something fragile, trusting, desperate, made her decision for her. She would not lose this battle. She would not lose this creature. She would not lose herself again. She sat beside the horse as the first rays of sunlight cut through the dusty air. There, in the quiet, she made a silent vow. If the desert wanted to test her, if fate wanted to drag her into another war she hadn't asked for, she would stand her ground. She had paid only $25 for this land, but the cost of keeping it safe was suddenly much higher. She whispered, "Whoever's coming, they're not taking you." The horse breathed out, slow and steady, as if agreeing. And far in the distance, something, a truck engine maybe, growled awake in the desert. The desert changed as the afternoon bled into evening, turning from harsh and metallic to soft and bruised. Maren had seen landscapes shift before, storms rolling over mountain ridges, rivers swelling into something unrecognizable. But nothing changed faster than heat-baked sand losing its light. She wiped the sweat from her forehead and realized how odd it felt to be sweating in December. The desert didn't care about months or seasons. It only cared about who survived its moods. The horse stayed close to her, hovering at a cautious distance as if unsure whether she was friend or threat. It had followed her all the way from the property to the small metal shack she used as shelter. Every time she stopped, it stopped. Every time she moved, it shadowed behind her with its ribs tight against its skin and its hooves trembling like it had walked too far for too long. "You shouldn't trust me this much," she whispered as she pushed the shack door open. "I'm barely surviving myself." But the horse only lowered its head, as if those words meant nothing and everything all at once. Inside, the shack felt colder, the metal panels leaking every bit of warmth the desert sun had offered. Maren lit a lantern, and its pale glow stretched across the walls like a hesitant promise. She set a bucket of water outside and tore open the only food she had that a horse might eat: dry oats meant for long hikes. When she brought them out, the horse flinched, then froze, then stepped forward like it was choosing hope over instinct. It ate slowly, as if afraid the food might disappear if it chewed too quickly. As the horse swallowed the last handful of oats, Maren crouched down to inspect it more closely. Its fur was sun-bleached, tangled with dust and thorn scratches. Its flank bore a brand, one she didn't recognize. Her breath caught. Someone owned this creature, someone who had let it starve, someone who might return for it. She didn't know which possibility frightened her more. The horse nudged her shoulder gently, pulling her out of her thoughts. It felt like a thank you, or maybe a plea. She let her hand rest on its neck, feeling the tremor beneath its skin. "We'll figure this out," she murmured. "Both of us." And for the first time since arriving at that worthless patch of land, she felt something flicker inside her, something that tasted like responsibility, like purpose, like she'd been handed a puzzle meant only for her. Hours passed. The lantern burned low. Outside, the desert cracked open with cold, the ground hissing softly under the sudden temperature drop. Maren wrapped herself in a blanket and tried to sleep, but the wind scraped against the metal walls like bones dragging across steel. Every gust carried a whisper of something old, forgotten. She couldn't shake the feeling that the desert wanted to tell her something. When she finally drifted off, the horse let out a deep, low call, a sound that wasn't fear or pain, but warning. Maren jolted awake, grabbing her boots and slipping outside. The desert was quiet, unnervingly so. The sky was a black dome scattered with stars that looked too close to touch. The horse stood perfectly still, head raised, eyes fixed on something in the darkness. Maren strained her vision, but she saw nothing, just dead shrubs and miles of open sand. Then faintly, she heard it. Footsteps, human, slow, approaching from the direction of the old well at the center of her property. The well she hadn't touched yet, the well the horse refused to go near. She felt her pulse thrum in her neck. "Hello?" she called out, making her voice steady, though her body felt carved out by fear. The footsteps paused. Then they changed, faster, uneven, like someone stumbling. Maren backed toward the shack, hand brushing the doorframe. The horse stepped in front of her instinctively, lowering its head as if to shield her. A figure emerged from the shadowed edge of the property, staggering, half collapsed, like every step was a battle. Maren's breath froze when the lantern light hit him. It was a man, sunburned, bleeding, exhausted. His clothes were torn, his hands covered with dust and something darker. He looked as if he hadn't slept in a week. When his eyes found Maren, his expression cracked wide open with desperate relief. You have it," he rasped. "Thank God, you found it." He took another step forward before collapsing to his knees. Maren froze, her mind racing. "Found what?" she whispered. The man lifted his head, and his face twisted with something between awe and fear. "The horse," he gasped. "It's mine, and so is everything it's been guarding." The horse reared back slightly, snorting in alarm. Maren instinctively moved closer to it, but the man extended a trembling hand, not to her, toward the desert behind her. "You don't understand," he choked out. "If it led you here, then it chose you, and that means you're in danger now." The lantern flickered violently, as if the desert wind pushed straight through the flame. Maren stared at him, her voice a dry whisper. "Danger from what?" The man looked at her with wide, panicked eyes. "From the ones who think the well is still sealed." The well. The sealed well. The one sitting at the dead center of the land she'd bought for $25. The one the horse refused to approach. A cold knot formed in her stomach. "Why?" she asked. "What's in the well?" The man swallowed hard, glancing at the horse with something like reverence. "Not what?" he whispered hoarsely. "Who?" The desert wind howled suddenly, sharp and cold, cutting across the land like a warning blade. The horse stepped closer to Maren, pressing its side against her leg. The man looked at them both, his face collapsing into desperation. "They're coming," he said. "You need to leave. Tonight. Before the others realize the horse is alive. Before they realize what it remembers." Maren's breath hitched. "Remembers?" The man nodded slowly. "You think it found you by accident?" "No. Horses don't starve themselves for no reason. They don't guard abandoned wells unless they've witnessed something worth dying for." Silence fell between them, heavy, ancient, the kind of silence that feels like it has a heartbeat. Maren's voice trembled. "What happened here?" The man closed his eyes, tears carving paths through the dust on his face. "A mistake," he whispered. "One that cost lives. One that someone else doesn't want coming back to the surface." He pointed toward the well, his hand shaking. "If you look inside, you'll see why I ran. You'll see why it followed you. And you'll see why the land was sold for $25. The desert felt suddenly smaller, tighter, as if it were closing in around them. The horse's breath puffed in front of Maren like smoke. She felt its fear and her own twisting together. Behind her, the darkness seemed to breathe. Maren turned toward the well, unable to stop herself. She felt the man's eyes burning into her back, pleading silently for her not to take another step. But the horse did something unexpected. It leaned forward and nudged her, gently but firmly, urging her to go. She walked into the desert night, the world shrinking to the pale glow of the lantern and the thrum of her own heartbeat. The well waited ahead like an open mouth. The horse followed beside her. And for the first time since she bought that barren land, Maren felt certain of one thing. Whatever slept beneath that property wasn't supposed to be found. Yet here she was, and the desert had chosen her. The wind picked up as dusk thickened over the desert, carrying sand in long, sweeping arcs that scraped against Mara's jacket. The air felt different tonight, sharper, tense, as if the desert itself had been holding its breath. The starving horse she'd rescued stood behind her now, no longer trembling, eating from the bucket she had set down. But its eyes never left the shape that moved on the horizon. At first, Mara thought it was just the shifting heat, a mirage, the way the desert played tricks when the sun dipped low. But the shadow kept growing, taking shape, moving with intention. Someone was coming, and her instincts tightened around her ribs like wire. She turned back toward the abandoned shack, the cheap, worthless plot she'd bought for $25. The door creaked behind her as she stepped inside. The journals she'd found earlier lay open on the table, pages that revealed more than she ever asked for. They told a story of a man who once lived here, a man who survived using harsh knowledge of the land, a man who hid something valuable enough to scare him into isolation, a man whose handwriting turned erratic near the end, as if he wrote with shaking hands. They also mentioned a horse, but not this horse. Another one he said would come back even after the desert tries to take him. Mara didn't know what that meant. She only knew the horse came to her starving, exhausted, and with a fear in its bones that didn't belong to an animal. Something had chased it. Something dangerous enough that the horse ran until it nearly collapsed at her feet. Outside, the horizon darkened. The shape became a vehicle. She stepped out again, rifle in hand, jaw tight. The horse let out a low, warning whinny. "Whoever you are," Mara murmured, voice calm but steady, "don't make me send you back where you came from." The truck stopped 20 yards away. Lights flicked off, sand rolled over the tires, and a man stepped out. He wore a weathered coat, the kind used by long-haul desert hunters. His movements were calm, too calm. When he looked up, Mara saw a flash of something cold in his eyes, something calculating. "That's my horse," he said. Mara didn't lower the rifle. "He looked half dead. Doesn't look like you took very good care of him." The man smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. He ran. Must have gotten spooked by something. Horses do that. Mara motioned with her chin toward the bruises along the animal's flank. "Those don't look like fear. They look like abuse." His jaw twitched. "That's none of your business." "Well," she said quietly, "making him suffer wasn't yours either." Silence settled heavy between them. Then the man's voice dropped lower. "There's something on that land you don't understand. Something that belongs to me." Mara felt her pulse tighten. She didn't show it. "You paid $25 for this patch of dirt," he continued. "A pretty good trick. Too bad you didn't ask why it was so cheap." "I figured the mystery was part of the deal," Mara said. He took a step closer. The horse stomped the ground nervously. "Walk away," he said softly. "Walk away, and I'll forget you interfered." "Can't," she replied. "I don't walk away from animals that need help." The man studied her with an expression that shifted slowly, something darker creeping into the lines of his face. "You've read the journals, haven't you?" Mara didn't answer. Her silence spoke for her. His voice hardened. Those records weren't supposed to survive. He wasn't supposed to write any of it down. Old fool didn't understand what he had. Mara kept the rifle raised. And what exactly is that? But she already knew part of it. She had seen the corner of metal sticking out of the sand behind the shack. A metal casing older than the house, older than the property line, wedged deep into the ground. She hadn't dug it up yet. "Let me guess," she said. "Something worth more than the land, something people would kill for." The man's eyes gleamed. Smart woman. The wind shifted again, carrying the sound of the horse's breath, sharp and scared. Mara glanced at him. The animal pressed closer to her side as if begging her not to hand him back. "You've hurt him before," Mara said, her voice low. "So he ran. straight to the first safe person he saw. Doesn't look like he wants to go with you. He doesn't get to want anything, the man snapped. That's not how survival works, Mara replied. Suddenly, the man reached for something at his belt. Mara's finger tightened on the trigger, but the horse moved faster. With a powerful surge, it leaped between them, slamming its body into the man and knocking him off balance. He hit the ground with a grunt, sand exploding around him. Mara didn't miss her chance. She lunged forward, pinned his arm down with her boot, and kicked the weapon from his hand. It slid across the sand, disappearing into the dark. You should have left the animal alone, she said coldly. The man writhed, fury twisting across his face. You don't know what you're protecting. And you don't know who I am, she said. His eyes narrowed. Then go ahead, finish it. She stepped back. I'm not you. I don't kill living things that are scared and cornered. The man bared his teeth. You can't stop me. Others are coming. They know what's buried here. They know he jerked his chin toward the horse, was trained to find it. That's why you won't keep him safe, not out here. Mara's stomach tightened. She looked at the horse, then at the shack, then at the sand-covered metal casing she had seen earlier. This wasn't a fight about property. It wasn't about the horse. It was about whatever the horse had been leading men like him to. Again and again. She took a breath. What's in the ground? She asked. The man laughed bitterly. Enough to make you richer than you can imagine. Or dead, depending on who gets to you first. He strained against her boot, but she pressed harder. I'm not leaving, she said. The horse stays with me. You can't protect him. I can, she said quietly, and I will. For the first time, the man's expression changed. Not anger, not calculation. Fear. For both your sakes, he hissed. Bury the journals. Forget what you read. I don't scare easily. Then you're a fool. He twisted suddenly, sand spraying upward. Mara stumbled back as he broke free, sprinting to his truck. The engine roared to life. Tires spun across the desert. Within seconds, he was gone, leaving only dust and the echo of his warning. The horse nudged Mara's shoulder gently, as if apologizing. She stroked its neck, grounding herself in the animal's trembling warmth. It's okay, she whispered. You're safe now. But her gaze drifted toward the buried metal corner behind the shack. She approached it slowly, as the wind quieted, the desert falling into an eerie, expectant silence. Kneeling, she brushed away the sand, and there it was, a metallic container the size of a trunk, edges corroded, surface stamped with faint markings she didn't recognize. Not symbols, just numbers. Above them, a government seal so weathered it was barely visible. Her breath caught. This wasn't treasure. This wasn't gold. It was something far more dangerous. The horse stepped closer, lowering its head beside her, as if urging her to uncover the rest. But Mara didn't move. She knew the moment she dug deeper, whatever lay inside would change everything. The desert was still around her, wind soft, sky bruised purple. The man's warning hummed in the back of her mind. Others are coming. She inhaled slowly, hands trembling. All right, she whispered to the horse. Let's see what you were trying to show me. And with one deliberate motion, she wiped more sand away. The metal lid shifted, just enough to reveal a faint hiss of cold air escaping, just enough to whisper that the past wasn't finished with her yet, just enough to promise that the desert, this worthless land, was worth far more than $25, and that whatever she found next might be the beginning of something she wasn't prepared for. But she didn't back away. She had already chosen to stay, chosen the horse. chosen the truth, even if it led her into danger. Especially if it did. The desert around her felt alive again, watching, waiting. Mara placed both hands on the lid and pulled,